governor, talking to voters like you. So I think the big and most important thing to stop and reflect on is the fact that we as Iowans have a pivotal role and a role that we need to take seriously, and that's picking the president. We are the first stop. 2007, our cohorts on the other side of the aisle launched Barack Obama's presidency. It's our job to launch the Republican answer to Barack Obama. And for me, that started about a year and a half ago when I got the chance to meet Governor Pawlenty, and my first tick off the list has to be executive experience. I'm a firm believer that you don't run an enterprise as large as the United States government. You don't lead the free world unless you have led something before. You have to understand accountability. You have to understand how to set a goal and achieve that goal and amass an enterprise behind you to get that. You can't just step into it and do it. And I say that as a legislator who'd like to think that we understand how government works. We need to be the man at the front. So we want to thank you for coming out. It's very important that you come out and ask the governor questions. I also want to say I hope to see you at Ames this Saturday. So Governor, me too. See you. Take care.
How are you? Good to see you. Hey guys, how are you doing? Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Can you get some pizza? Yes. Well, I'm delighted that you're here. Thanks for taking time out of your weekday afternoon with the sun out, a beautiful day in the summertime. The fact that you come in the middle of the day to be part of our roundtable discussion, I really appreciate it. My wife Mary just landed in Des Moines, so she's going to be with us on the campaign trail for the rest of the week, as she was last week. I hope you have a chance to meet her sometime. She's really wonderful. I want to just give you a couple of thoughts about the campaign that I think are most important. Just leave the rest of the time for informal discussion. But I'm running for president of the United States because I believe I've got the experience, the record results, the values, and the strength to get this country back to a better place. And we learned in election 2008 that if you have candidates who come through town like Barack Obama, convince the Democrats in this state to catapult him to the White House, we should ask some additional questions of our candidates. One of which is, are you ready for the job? You know, have you led something in an executive position? Has it had a public component to it? And did you drive it to results and lead it to results? Barack Obama did. He was a community organizer. He was a college professor. He was in the United States Senate long enough to have a cup of coffee before it got cold, before it put him in the White House, and we're wondering why it's not working. There's a big difference, as you know. I used to be in the legislature between pushing a button, no offense to my friend Eric, one of the leaders in the Iowa legislature, yes or no, and actually leading something. So one of the lessons we learned about the last election was before you put somebody in the White House and make him or her president of the United States, make sure they're ready for the job. I am. Number two, we want to make sure that the person doesn't just talk, but has a record of results. And President Obama was like an elixir salesman rolling through town, promising all these great medicinal and political medicinal remedies, but it's the wrong direction for the country, and he broke his promises on most of it. So the words were great, but you can't fill up your car with gas on words. You can't pay your mortgage on speeches. You can't pay your health premiums with rhetoric. And so it's not about soaring rhetoric or words or speeches. It's having gotten the job done. And he hasn't. We've got a country now that has nearly $4 a gallon gas. We have a country that has crushing levels of unemployment. We have a federal government that's out of control. And he seems unwilling or unable to lead in any detail in a forceful way to get this stuff done. And then lastly, he made a series of promises to the country. There were a lot of them, 10, 15 of them, big ones. And he didn't do them. He said, look, if you come in and be president, in fact, he said this after he was president, I'll cut the deficit in half during my first term as president. That was his promise to America. He didn't cut it in half, he tripled it. He was here in Iowa making promises about doing health care with Republicans, focusing on cost containment. And as a candidate, he was against the individual mandate. Then he went to Washington, D.C., and he broke all his promises. Then he said to fix the economy, we should pass the pork-filled stimulus bill. Remember that? He said if you don't, he threatened the country and said unemployment could go all the way up to 8%. Maybe. Well, it didn't go to 8%, it went to 10%. So that's just some of the misguided and broken promises. And then he's got this worldview and direction for the country that's just flat wrong and dangerous. He wants to take things from the private sector and bring them into government. We want to take things from government and bring them back into the private sector. There's reasons for that and philosophy behind that, but that's the shorter version. So we know that Barack Obama is wrong for this country. We also need to make sure that we learn the lessons. And I know Iowa is first, and it's got an incredibly important role to play to be first, but we want to also make sure Iowa's right in selecting the candidate who's ready for the country and right for the country. Now, Barack Obama, I think, is largely done politically in the stick of fork. When you look at his numbers nationally, they're not very good. And you look at his numbers in swing states amongst independent voters, his numbers are awful. So the main way the Republicans are going to goof this up is to nominate a candidate that the rest of the country says, I don't think so. And that's a real danger, because if the election were held today, he'd he'd lose. Unless we put somebody up where we can easily use his $1 billion to tear that person down pretty easily. And that's what he intends to do. He can't win on his positive record. He's just going to show the flaws or try to on the Republican candidate. So we need a seasoned, tested leader with a record of results, not just words. Now, what do I bring to the table? Number one, every candidate, or most candidates, are going to say many of the same things. You know, if some other candidate was sitting here talking to me today and say, I'm the one who cut taxes, I'm the one who cut spending, government spending, I'm the one who will focus on schools, on parents, not on the federal government. They'll say, I'm the one who will crack down on illegal immigration. They'll say, I'm the one who's the most pro-life, I'm the one who's the most traditional marriage, I'm the one who will appoint conservative justices, I'm the one who will deal with the public employee unions and get those in line. And you listen to all that and more and say, gosh, they all sound pretty similar. What really is the difference between these candidates? Who should I support at the Ames straw poll or at the caucuses next year? Well, I hope you support somebody who's actually done these things, not just talked about them. And if you go look at my record in Minnesota, which is not an easy place to get this done, I never had a Republican legislature. I took spending from historic highs to historic lows. Done. I took taxes and cut them $800 million during my 8 years as governor, even though we had the effects of 2 recessions during that time. I did school reform. I took on the public employee teacher unions and said we're going to move towards performance pay, not just seniority pay, and a number of other reforms. I did public employee pension reform and compensation reform more broadly before it was the cool and popular thing to do in the country. I advanced the pro-life cause in Minnesota in historic ways. We now have abortions in Minnesota at the most rapid declining rate and one of the lowest rates in the history of the state. And I proposed in signing the law Women's Right to Know. I proposed in signing the law, the Positive Alternatives to Abortion Act, and more. And was written up recently as probably the most pro-life candidate in this race. I was the author, one of the authors of the Defense of Marriage Act in Minnesota, and we put it on the books. I appointed conservative justices to the Minnesota Supreme Court. We now have a majority of conservative justices for the first time in the modern history, maybe the whole history, of Minnesota Supreme Court. Crack down on illegal immigration, welfare reform, and the like. So with these things, the proof is in the pudding. Anybody can sit here and give you the Republican talking points. That's not very hard. My goodness, I could train one of these media guys to do it here in 5 or 10 minutes. That's not the hard part. The hard part is, have you actually done it? Do you have the leadership skill and experience and fortitude and strength to actually get it done? I did. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the speeches. I don't think we need any more, fancy speeches and goofy rhetoric and entertainment. What we need is somebody who's going to put his or her shoulders back and plow ahead and get this thing done, not based on words, but on skill and leadership and results. And that's what I offer. And then finally, people are going to say, hey, look, I can do it because I'm the one who can win in those swing states like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the kinds of states that we're going to need to win the election. Well, I actually did it statewide. We got elected and re-elected in Minnesota. So I think you know what we got to do and why. This country is a great country not because of our government, but because of our people. We got our government creeping into our lives in such a way where they're not only growing their budgets, they're not only growing their footprint, but they are slowly suffocating our freedom. And that's not an overstatement. Sometimes it happens so incrementally you don't even notice, but when they come into your life and say that they're going to take over more of the private sector, when they're going to tax it more and regulate it more and slow it down and discourage it and make it more difficult, again, they're not only growing their budget, they're diminishing and discouraging the American spirit. And we got to stop it, and we got to get it back to what we know works. And that is free markets and freedom, turning towards God, not away from God, making sure that we have jobs and an economy in this country not based on an out-of-control growing government, but based on real businesses want to start in the private sector and provide real jobs and more. And I don't come at this with the perspective of, some academic or some spreadsheet. I lived this life. I grew up in a meatpacking town. I mean, my dad was a truck driver. My mom was a homemaker. My mom died when I was young. And my brothers and sisters never went to college because they didn't have the chance to just be, or the capability. They just didn't have the chance. And your mom dies and your dad loses his job for a while, as mine did not too long after that. You get to see life up close and real personal at a really young age. So when people talk about the American dream, some think it's just some fairy tale. I lived it. It's not a fairy tale. It's real. And we want to keep that alive for us and for our kids and for our grandkids. And I know you share that, so let's go do that. I hope you'll come to Ames this Saturday and support my campaign. We need you. The voting's from 10 to 4. You don't have to stay the whole day. You can come through part of the day. I think you'll find it interesting. There's food, there's bands, there's speeches. Many of you have probably been there before, but if you haven't, everybody says it's a good time. It's an interesting time, but more importantly, it's a meaningful time to get the country back on track and get something to defeat Barack Obama and offer conservative, effective, tested leadership for the country. And that's what I'll do. I appreciate it and look forward to any questions or issues you want to discuss.